Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Laurie Bembenek? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case. I'll move to the timeline of the crime, then I'll offer my analysis. Laurencia Bembenek was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on August 15, 1958. Years later, she would change her name to Laurie, so that's the name that I will use here. Laurie's father was a former police officer in the Milwaukee Police Department. Laurie had two older sisters. She graduated from high school in 1976 and enrolled in a college in Virginia Beach, Virginia, where she would earn an associate degree in fashion merchandising management. Laurie worked as a model for a short time. She wanted to work as a manager in the fashion business, but the company that she wanted to work for required management trainees to be at least 24 years old. Laurie decided to join the police force instead. She wanted to follow in the steps of her father. It's rare that an individual would be interested in both fashion and police work, although I guess she would have been well qualified to be an officer in the fashion police. Laurie entered the Milwaukee Police Academy in March 1980. In the summer of 1980, she graduated from the academy and started working for the Milwaukee Police Department. She would later say that this police department was full of officers who were lazy, apathetic, corrupt, and brutal. Female officers were discriminated against and harassed. They were penalized for minor infractions, whereas male officers were given a pass. Laurie was fired from the police department in August of 1980 after being accused of smoking marijuana by a fellow police trainee named Judy Zess. Judy was caught herself smoking marijuana and fired. Laurie found work as a waitress. She would eventually work as a personal trainer and a security guard. Laurie managed to obtain photographs of Milwaukee police officers dancing naked on picnic tables at a park. She believed that these photographs proved her point about how male officers were not punished for offenses that female officers would be punished for. She filed a claim of discrimination with Internal Affairs. There was no update about whether or not the picnic tables filed a complaint. Laurie moved into an apartment with Judy Zess and Judy's boyfriend. She started dating a police officer named Fred Schultz. He had divorced from his wife, Christine, in November of 1980. Laurie married Fred in January 1981 and again in November of 1981 after the first marriage was ruled invalid because Fred did not wait 6 months from his divorce to remarry. The couple lived in his apartment. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On May 28, 1981, at 2:15 a.m., Fred's ex-wife Christine was attacked by an assailant in her residence in Milwaukee. Her hands were tied in front of her using a clothesline-style rope. She was gagged with a blue bandana and blindfolded. The assailant shot her one time in the back with a .38 caliber revolver. Christine did not survive. Her two sons were in the residence during the attack. They were 7 and 11 years old. Here's what the investigation revealed. There was no forced entry. Nothing was stolen. Christine's 11-year-old son described the assailant as a muscular man with a reddish-colored ponytail, which looked like a wig. The man was wearing black shoes and a green jogging suit. 2 human hairs were recovered at the crime scene. At least this is what the officers claimed. Per the policy of the police department, Fred's service weapon and off-duty weapon were analyzed. The off-duty weapon was a Smith & Wesson Model 37, which is a .38 caliber revolver. It was found in his apartment and determined to be the murder weapon. Fred told police that he was working at the time of the murder. He and his partner were investigating a burglary. Later, Fred admitted that he was lying. He was actually drinking at a local bar with his partner while on duty. Because Fred had an alibi, the police turned their attention to Laurie, because she lived in the same apartment and had access to the revolver. The theory was that Laurie murdered Christine so that Fred would not have to pay alimony. On June 24, 1981, Laurie was arrested for murder. Her trial gained a lot of media attention. She was referred to as Bambi. On March 9, 1982, Laurie was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Fred had initially said that he thought Laurie was innocent, but over time his position changed drastically. He referred to Laurie as guilty as sin. Laurie and Fred divorced in 1984. Laurie earned her bachelor's degree and helped start a newspaper in prison. I imagine a person publishing a newspaper in prison could get better circulation with breakout news as opposed to breaking news. Laurie became engaged to a man named Dominic Gugliotto, who was the brother of her cellmate. On July 15, 1990, Laurie climbed through a basement laundry room window and made her way to the prison fence. She used her belt to collapse 3 strands of barbed wires and climb over the fence. She then entered Dominic's vehicle and they drove to Ontario, Canada. They were posing as newlyweds. Laurie found work in a diner. A tourist spotted Laurie there after seeing a story on America's Most Wanted. The couple was arrested in Canada on October 17, 1990. Dominic was sent back to the United States and eventually sentenced to 1 year in prison. He said he never heard from Laurie again. He seemed like he was pretty upset about that. Laurie told the Canadian government that she was a victim of conspiracy. The judicial system and the Milwaukee Police Department were out to get her. The Canadian government asked the authorities in Milwaukee to review her case. No evidence of a conspiracy was found, but the review did find serious mistakes in the murder investigation. Laurie was granted a new trial. She returned to the United States in April of 1991. In December 1992, she pleaded no contest to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. That sentence was commuted to time served, and she was released in about 3 hours. Life after prison was challenging for Laurie. She was arrested for possessing marijuana. She filed for bankruptcy. She was diagnosed with hepatitis C and post-traumatic stress disorder. She started consuming excessive quantities of alcohol, and she had a tough time finding and keeping work. When she did manage to find a job, they would fire her as soon as they found out about her criminal record. I guess they were trying to maintain a murder-free work environment. In 1996, Laurie moved to Washington State. She started dating a man named Marty Carson. They would get married in 2005. Laurie would paint as a form of therapy. After several years, she had produced about 30 paintings. She put them on display in a local art gallery, but the gallery caught on fire and all her paintings were destroyed. They reimbursed her for the cost of materials only. In 2002, Laurie broke her foot after traveling out of a second-story window. Her foot was later amputated. It's not clear if she jumped, was pushed, or fell. Laurie said that she had been put in the apartment by people working for the Dr. Phil television show. It brought back feelings of being in solitary confinement, and she panicked. She fell out of the window while trying to escape. Some people who go to Phil McGraw's show lose their dignity, but I've never heard of a guest losing their foot. Laurie continued to maintain her innocence. She filed an appeal to reverse her murder conviction. It was denied in 2008. Laurie Bembenek died from liver and kidney failure on November 20, 2010. She was 52 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Was Laurie Bembenek actually guilty of murder? She always maintained her innocence, saying that Fred Schultz must have hired someone to kill Christine. Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that Laurie was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Laurie had often talked about killing Christine. A witness testified that Laurie offered to pay him to commit the murder. Laurie owned a green jogging suit. Laurie owned a blue bandana and a clothesline similar to the one found at the crime scene. Strands of hair found in the blue bandana matched Laurie. A store employee testified that Laurie purchased a wig not long before the murder. A wig was found in a drain pipe at the apartment shared by Laurie and Fred. Fibers from the wig matched fibers found at the crime scene. Laurie had access to a firearm that matched the one used in the murder. Laurie did not have an alibi. She said she was home alone in her apartment. Now moving to the exculpatory factors. It's worth noting that much of this evidence was uncovered years after her trial. The Milwaukee Police Department appeared to be corrupt. Their investigation was a catastrophe. Judy Zess had initially testified against Laurie, but recanted her testimony later, claiming she was pressured by the police. Judy admitted that she owned a brownish-red wig. I mentioned that a wig was found in the drain at Laurie's apartment. This drain was actually shared between Laurie and her neighbor. The neighbor said that Judy stopped by her apartment and asked to use her bathroom. Judy was the last person to use the bathroom before the drain became clogged, which is what led to the discovery of the wig. The 11-year-old son of Christine Schultz said that the attacker was a muscular man. He specifically said it was not Laurie. These blonde hairs that were supposedly found in the blue bandana and matched to Laurie were not found during the initial examination by the medical examiner. Rather, the hairs magically appeared in evidence later on. It's difficult to believe that Laurie would wear a green tracksuit in public, considering her fashion sense. The Smith & Wesson Model 37 that was supposedly the murder weapon was matched based on an imprint on Christine's body left by the muzzle of the gun being pressed up against her skin. The muzzle imprint on her body was 264% larger than the muzzle of a Model 37. The original ballistics testing showed that the bullet that killed Christine Schultz matched Fred's off-duty service weapon, but at a later hearing, the police said they lost the bullet. It had been destroyed in a flood in 1986. I guess the department did not use waterproof bullets. Christine made statements before she died suggesting that she was afraid that Fred Schultz was going to kill her. It would be very unusual for a female offender to tie up a victim. Christine Schultz had sex with a man before she died. Laurie's DNA was not found at the crime scene. There is a viable alternate theory of the crime. A man named Freddie Hornberger was a former boyfriend of Judy Zess. He knew Fred Schultz as well. Freddie robbed Judy 5 weeks after Christine's murder. The robbery that he perpetrated had 6 items in common with Christine's murder. The victim's hands were tied. The victim was gagged. He wore a blondish red wig tied back in a ponytail. He wore a green tracksuit. There was no forced entry, and he was carrying a .38 caliber revolver. Freddie would be sentenced to 10 years in prison for that attack. He denied having any involvement in the homicide. He brought an end to his own life in November of 1991 after allegedly committing another robbery. When considering all this evidence, do I think that Laurie Bembenek was guilty? No. I don't think she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and I don't think she was guilty in reality. There is very little evidence connecting her to the murder. I think it's more likely that the police framed her for the crime. Now moving to my final thoughts. Some people who knew Laurie said that she had undiagnosed bipolar disorder. She would go back and forth between depressed and manic. Her mood was never stable. She was also described as charismatic, manipulative, and excitement-seeking. Interestingly, when she testified in her own defense, the jury thought she was cold, uncaring, and distant. Laurie had an inconsistent presentation. Everybody who looked at her saw something different. I think the theme of Laurie's life is that she was all over the place across many dimensions: her appearance, her career, her relationships, and her personality. Laurie Bembenek never truly found stability or peace. Those are my thoughts on the case of Laurie Bembenek. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis as interesting as reading breakout news in a prison newspaper. Thanks for watching.